Part 3. Beyond the data. Know that it is a hopeless undertaking to debate about fundamental value judgments. For instance, if someone approves, as a goal, the extirpation of the human race from the earth, one cannot refute such a viewpoint on rational grounds. Albert Einstein, Ideas and Opinions, 1954. The liberal reward of labor, therefore, as it is the effect of increasing wealth, so it is the cause of increasing population. To complain of it is to lament over the necessary effect and cause of the greatest public prosperity. It is in the progressive state, while the society is advancing to the further acquisition of riches, that the condition of the laboring poor of the great body of people seems to be the happiest and the most comfortable. It is hard in the stationary and miserable in the declining state. The progressive state is in reality the cheerful and the hearty state to all the different orders of the society. The stationary is dull, the declining melancholy. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, 1776. "How much do babies cost?" said he, the other night upon my knee. For babies, people have to pay a heavy price from day to day. There is no way to get one cheap. Why, sometimes when they're fast asleep, you have to get up in the night and go and see if they're all right. But what they cost in constant care and worry does not half compare with what they bring of joy and bliss. You'd pay much more for just a kiss. What a Baby Costs, in collected verse of Edgar A. Guest, 1946. Chapter 35. How the comparisons people make affect their beliefs about whether things are getting better or worse. My mother was born in 1900. One of her brothers died of diphtheria in infancy, with the doctors helpless. In 1937, her only son was saved from death at age 5 by the first new wonder drug, sulfanilamide. In her 80s, she knew that her friends had mostly lived extraordinarily long lives, mostly in good health. She was grateful for the new miracles of medical science, and she appreciated the convenience and comfort provided by such modern inventions as the telephone, central heating with gas, and airplanes. Yet Mother insisted that life was worse in the 1980s than when she was young. When one pressed her why she thought so, she said, "The headlines in the newspaper are all bad." When I say to her that pollution is decreasing in the United States, my wonderful Aunt Ruth, now in her 80s, responds, "But the pollution in the Bay, near her home in Queens, New York, is much worse than when we moved here." When I remind her of the pollution in the water that killed children with typhoid and diphtheria when she was young, she sighs. I guess you're right, but I don't think I have changed her outlook much. When one say to my wonderful Aunt Anna, also in her 80s, that everything material is better now than when she was young, she answers, "But you read in the papers about so much wrongdoing." Reminding her of the horrors of 2 world wars, when paradoxically there often was good news in the papers, and mentioning the frauds of the 1920s brings her to nod agreement, but that's only because she loves her nephew, I think. How could these people of generally good judgment and usually cheerful nature hold beliefs so contrary to the facts on the basis of such flimsy and ephemeral evidence? The only plausible answer is, as I wrote in the introduction, that none of us can carefully inspect the evidence for most of the beliefs that we hold, and out of convenience we simply adopt the most easily available ideas. This is not an intellectual scandal. When a Newsweek story can be headed, "More Bad News for the Planet," March 28, 1988, p. 63, in a year and a decade of almost unbroken good news for the planet and the human enterprise, who can blame casual readers from sharing that point of view? It is another matter, however, when people insist on holding on to these ideas even when they are provided more reliable information, just because the beliefs have become so ingrained. As another Newsweek column, Robert J. Samuelson, April 4, 1988, p. 51, noted, "Looking for bad news? The better the economy does, the more we worry that its good behavior won't continue." He observed that economists are expressing their doubts, spotting a lot of potential problems, but their analyses aren't especially focused. They reflect a general anxiety about the future as much as a clear picture of what lies ahead. It's a bewildering game, Everyone keeps getting good news and looking for the bad. In the midst of a spate of excellent economic news and a better state of the economy than in many years, those economists, like others, seem to seek ways to characterize the situation as frightening or worsening, even when the signs point the other way. This book is full of strong evidence. The bet offered in the introduction dramatizes the facts that the overall trend is toward things getting better rather than worse. Why, then, do people have a negative perception despite the positive trend? Surely an important cause of the belief that things are going poorly and that the future outlook is gloomy is the type of comparisons that a person makes. The effect of looking at short-run and intergroup comparisons rather than long-run absolute comparisons was mentioned in the discussion of black and white infant mortality in Chapter 22. Full discussion of the subject of comparisons fills another book, Simon, 1993. I can only touch on the subject here. Wise people have written for thousands of years that whether a person feels happy or sad depends in considerable part on the benchmark against which you compare what you believe to be your current state of affairs. So important is this element in our mood that it is the key element in psychological depression. The choice of benchmark for comparison is seldom forced on us by the world, but rather is mainly within our control. The development of the personal computer and people's feelings about it illustrates the point. People commonly are delighted with their first computer because they see immediately how much it eases their work. But we quickly take the computer for granted and even become dissatisfied that it does not work even faster. A delay of a few seconds becomes irksome, even as the computer is saving hours or days compared to the pre-computer situation. The old programs feel clunky. The result is a continual desire for faster and faster computers, bigger and bigger hard drives, more and more work-saving utilities, and ever fancier refinements on the programs. Because of this trend of rising expectations and rising desires, many people wind up no happier in their work than before they had computers. Another example, an obstetrician in Washington, D.C., announced in 1990 that he was quitting the practice of obstetrics because for the second time, a prospective mother had asked of him the impossible, that he guarantee her a perfect baby. In years past, when life in general and childbearing in particular were so much more risky than now, no woman would have even thought of such a request. But now women expect and demand complete safety and flawless offspring. This shows how quickly we take for granted an improvement in our lives and compare other states of affairs to the new and improved state rather than to how it used to be. And if our prospects are not better than the newly improved state, we grouse. This psychological mechanism of rising expectations explains much about people's thinking about population, resources, and the environment. The public demands an ever-increasing purity of air and water. In itself, that certainly is a good thing. But when the public judges that our air and water now are dirty and polluted, this makes no sense if one remembers the terrible pollutions that were banished in the past century or so. The typhoid fever that polluted even the Hudson River at New York, the smallpox that humanity has finally pursued to the ends of the earth and apparently eradicated, the dysentery and cholera that distressed and killed people all over the world, as it still does in Asia and Africa, the plagues and other epidemics that harm us much less than in generations past, or not at all. Not only are we in the rich countries free of malaria, largely due to our intensive occupation of the land, see Chapter 32, but even the mosquitoes that only cause itches with their bites are now so few in many affluent urban areas that people no longer need window screens for their homes and can have garden parties at dusk. It is a proof of our extraordinary success in healing the earth that the horrors of the past, which were transmitted by filthy air and water, are no longer even thought of as pollutions. Now that we have largely overcome humanity's historic enemies, wild animals, hunger, epidemic disease, heat, and cold, we worry about a large new class of phenomena in the environment and in society. This saying expresses this idea: no food, one problem; plenty of food, many problems. Apparently, it is built into our mental systems that no matter how good things become, our aspiration level ratchets up so that our anxiety level declines hardly at all, and we focus on ever smaller actual dangers. Parents manage to worry about their kids' health and safety, even though the mortality of children is spectacularly lower than in prior decades and centuries. And Orthodox Jews and Muslims in the United States continue to worry about whether their food is ritually pure, even though the protections against ritual contamination are remarkably better than in the past. Once upon a time, Orthodox Jews said that a Jew eats a small pig every year without knowing it. Nowadays, with plastic wrapping at the manufacturer and the microscopic examination techniques of modern science, the level of purity is much higher than in the past. But the level of concern does not abate. We cause ourselves lots of grief by the comparisons we make. We fail to enjoy our good fortune. In a very poor, largely Hispanic town of New Mexico, this sign was in front of a ramshackle church. The proper attitude is gratitude. Yet the more we really have to be grateful for, it seems, the less grateful and the more dissatisfied we become, the phenomenon noted by the philosophers of all ages. Instead of gratitude, our attitude is, "What have you done for me lately?" Still one more saying from a football coach's wall: attitude is a matter of choice. This mental quirk has consequences beyond keeping us from enjoying our improved life as much as we might. It also leads to the call for government to fix the supposedly bad conditions. And these calls for more government, predicated on the assertion that things have been getting worse when in fact they have been getting better, are likely to lead to fixing what ain't broke and causing trouble thereby. One of the problems in understanding modern life are the implicit comparisons to the past, often a non-existent past, that people often make. We imagine Africa as people swinging from the trees like Tarzan, pre-Columbus North America as Native Americans sitting around campfires and growing up to tall, strong adulthood on plentiful, organically grown, pesticide-free food, never suffering the difficulties of adolescence. The U.S. Middle West as a fertile area where people needed to do no more than throw seeds upon the ground for there to be bountiful harvests. Europeans spending most of their time dancing around the maypole and only rarely having to pull a forelock in respect to some authority. Almost no one dying before old age, death being sudden and painless, and microorganism diseases such as tuberculosis and plague being mere romantic interludes suffered by a few artists. But these faulty comparisons are not inevitable. You can train yourself to reflect on the comparison between what you have and what you had in the past, rather than on between what you have and what you might have, or what others have. One, get enormous pleasure from having an alarm clock with a snooze bar so that I can be awakened, hit the bar, and grab another 9 minutes of lovely sleep. I keep in mind how it was to work without a computer and a copy machine. And I remember how Oliver Wendell Holmes carried in a satchel the manuscript of his first book with him to every social engagement, for fear of losing it in a fire while he was away. Nor was this an imagined fear. At least one author lost forever the only copy of his novel on the New York subway. Copy machines and electronic copy relieve authors of this nightmare. If one does not reflect on comparisons with how things used to be, and instead one focuses on some particular phenomenon which has temporarily gotten worse, or spends one's time thinking about politics or relative poverty, where there are by definition as many losers as winners, and where some sordidness is an inevitable outcome of our human nature, then one will fail to see all the long-term good news about the material conditions of life. Another problem with our comparisons. Consider the data in various countries, in various years, asking people how happy they are. The distribution of poll results in any year is relatively independent of how rich the country is, or compared to itself in other years, or compared to other countries, though there is some slight positive association with income. Apparently, individuals' benchmarks move in such a fashion that people stay in much the same relationship to their personal benchmarks. As to why there is a distribution among individuals, one might just as well put it down to genetic and/or early influences as to anything else. Some reflections on jogging through San Francisco. Jogging and walking through the beautiful streets and extraordinary modern buildings of downtown San Francisco. One thought: Instead of standing in the present and making comparisons backwards, let us place ourselves at various moments in the past and look forward, asking at each point, what is it that at this moment I most want for humanity and civilization? Our early wants were material. The first great want surely was defense against wild beasts. Not only have we learned how to protect ourselves against big lions and bears, but we have also succeeded in conquering most of the small things: mosquitoes, microbes, and soon even viruses. Thousands of years ago, we also wanted a steady supply of food. Progress was slow and irregular, but now we have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. We have wanted cheap energy to heat and fuel our lives. That problem is solved forever with nuclear power. We have wanted metals and spices, and people foraged and traded for them all through the world in ancient times. Nowadays, abundant quantities of them cost only insignificantly small parts of our total expenditures. The human mind fulfilled these wants, as Prometheus bragged, c. 592. More than anything else, we have wanted to forestall bad health and early death, particularly for our children. In the past couple of centuries, we have spectacularly succeeded in our fight against untimely mortality. Only quantitatively small parts of the job remain yet to be done. Starting a few hundred years ago, during the Industrial Revolution, reformers most wanted liberation from back-breaking and mind-stultifying work in factories. Machines and robots now do that work for us, as they have also liberated women from heavy and repetitive chores in the home. We have wanted such great wars as the U.S. Civil War, World War I and World War II to cease, and for our world to be at peace. The world is now safe from mass war to an almost unprecedented degree. We have wanted our fear of war reduced, and in the past few years, we have received that gift too. Is this assessment balanced? What about the supposed ills and evils of today that were not foreseen in the earlier times? The supposed breakup of the family, increasing numbers of homeless people on city streets, automobile and airplane deaths, nuclear fear in children, and other contemporary pathology, actual or mythical. Here we must come to grips with the central premise of economic thought, that what the individual chooses is called better. We can try to imagine whether people in those earlier times would prefer to have had the troubles which they wished to end and which we have ended, versus the supposed new troubles of today. My guess is that when faced with wild beasts and decimated by plague, and given an imagined choice, earlier people would have chosen life in the 20th century with its attendant new worries in preference to their problems. Furthermore, in our times, one almost always has a choice between living with and without any particular pathology. If one does not like the supposed high urban crime rate, one may live in a small town and be free of urban problems, yet still be safe from the evils of earlier times that we have gotten rid of. As to the supposed new threats of destruction, such as nuclear war, it seems to me that a fair and rational assessment must be in terms of their demonstrated destruction up till now. The number of people killed by nuclear warfare until now is minuscule compared to other destroyers. Of course, this is not a fair way to look at the overall risk, but neither would be the kind of scary scenario cooked up by some anti-nuclear war protesters. Footnote: nowadays in San Francisco, one sees pedicabs carrying tourists and powered by healthy, well-muscled college boys. These pedicabs are almost a parody of the pedicabs that one saw in China years ago and can still see in India, ridden by bone-thin family heads eking out a bare living as long as health holds. The San Francisco pedicabs dramatize how our world has changed. Pedicab work nowadays can be done as an amusing and lucrative summer job. Can one doubt that this change, getting rid of back-breaking, life-destroying labor, is for the better? Low-calorie cheese also shows how much we have achieved in things that people wanted in the past, to eat more rather than fewer calories. And the cheese can be eaten solely for its taste value, ignoring and even trying to get rid of calories.